This video is going to cover mass to molecules calculations. When we've taken notes on this previously, we only looked at one half of our map. We looked at either grams to moles, or we looked at atoms and moles, or molecules to moles. Now we're going to put those together into one calculation. We're still going to use our map, but now our map is even more important because it's going to help us go through the two steps that we need to for these calculations. So for all of these, my train tracks are going to be just a little bit longer. Okay, instead of just 2 tracks, now I have 3 tracks. Okay, for all of these problems. My steps are going to be the exact same as we've done previously. So I'm always going to start with what I'm given, which is 2.09 times 10 to the 23rd. And since we have atoms, I'm going to use atoms at the top. Since atoms are on the top, I know that atoms have to go on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. You can use your cards if you would like. So we are right here with atoms. So what number always goes in front of atoms? I can go ahead and write that down. It's the 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. So now this is important where my map comes in, because my map is going to tell me where to go to next. So if I'm at atoms, I know that I have to go to moles next. The question is asking for grams, but I cannot go straight to grams. There is no line that goes directly from molecules to grams. There's no arrow, so I cannot go that direction. I have to take a roundabout way. I have to go through moles first. So my arrow is pointing to moles, so I know that moles is going to be next. So I'm going to choose mole to go at the top, and then the problem again says 1 mole. So I'm going to write down 1 mole. If I have moles at the top, I know that moles has to be at the bottom. Again, my map says to use 1 mole. This time, now I'm ready to go from moles to grams. So my grams are going to be at the top. Okay, so I have followed my map. I've started with atoms. Here, I'll erase this so we can kind of follow through again. I've started with atoms and I went to moles. That was my first step. Then I went from mole to grams. So each section on our train track is going to be one step in our problem. So now, remember, to get my number that goes in front of grams, I have to use my molar mass, which is just straight from the periodic table. So since this is talking about nitrogen, remember nitrogen is a diatomic, so that means there are 2 nitrogens. I have to add up my mass for nitrogen from the periodic table. So if 1 nitrogen is 14.007, I have to add that twice. So I get 28.014. Okay, so all I did was I took 1 nitrogen and added up 2 times, okay, because nitrogen is a diatomic element. Now I'm ready to just multiply the top and then divide by everything on the bottom. Remember to try to use parentheses whenever you see that big number on the bottom. That will make sure that your calculator basically does the right kind of math. So I multiplied 2.09 times 10 to the 23rd times 1 times 28. And I'm going to divide by 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. My final answer is 9.72, and this is grams. We're going to move on and do these fairly quickly. However, you can always pause and rewind if you need to rewatch any of these steps. I'm going to set up my train tracks, and I'm going to start with the first number given to me in the problem, which is 6.9 times 10 to the 22nd. And this is formally units, so this just means things. This falls under the category where molecules, all of those things are. So I'll write it in green because that's the same color we used for atoms. So I'm just going to write units. Okay, so again, the terminology, we're just right here. We're talking about the things, okay? So if I have units on the top, I know that units have to be on the bottom, and the number that goes in front of that is 6.022. And all I'm doing is just following my map. So now my map says I'm going from atoms to mole, and it's always 1 mole. So mole is on the top, and it's always 1. If I have mole on the top, I have to have mole on the bottom. Again, my map says that it should be 1 mole. And then I'm going to follow my map to grams. So my last unit that I'm going to write down is grams. If you're using your cards, which I suggest you do, this will be a lot easier because you will run out of cards and you won't be able to put them in the wrong spots. So once I've used my cards for atoms and atoms on the top, atoms on the bottom, I don't have any more atoms cards. So that means I have to choose something different. So this will help you if you're setting up your problems with your cards. If you want to draw it out on your desk, that will help you formulate your problem, and then you can worry about putting all the numbers in the right spots. So now that I have all my units in the right spots, I can go and add in my grams. We're talking about NaCl, sodium chloride, so I have to add up sodium plus a chlorine. And that comes out to be 58.44. Okay, so I added up a sodium and I added up a chlorine. Again, if you need to pause the video at any time, feel free so that you can catch up. I'm going to multiply the top, divide by the bottom numbers. Again, I'm going to use parentheses around the number here on the bottom. There we go. I'm multiplying all the numbers on the top, dividing by all the numbers on the bottom. And my final answer comes out to be 6.7 grams. I know it's grams because that's the only card, the only unit that doesn't have a match. I've already canceled out or matched up all my other units. Last two problems. Again, we're just going to set up our train tracks. I'm going to start by writing out the number that I am given, which is 12.044 times 10 to the 23rd. Again, this is atoms. So if atoms are on the top, I know that atoms have to be on the bottom. And I'm just going to follow my map. So if I'm starting with atoms, that means my next step is moles. Sorry, that was a highlighter. Is moles. If I have moles on the top, I know moles have to go on the bottom. And then my next step is going to be to go to grams. Okay, so I can use my map to tell me what numbers go where. Anytime I'm talking about atoms, I'm going to use the 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. That's 1 mole. Again, 1 mole. So I'm just working my way through. And then the way that I get grams is I'm going to use my molar mass. And this is talking about copper. So I'm just going to go straight to my periodic table. Right? So my molar mass is always going to be on my periodic table. And copper is 63 point, we'll say 55. So now all my numbers are in there. So notice I started with my units. I set up my cards so I could cancel out. And then I went in and used my map to tell me what numbers go where. So now I can multiply the top. and divide by the bottom, and I get 127.1 grams. Again, don't forget your parentheses because you don't want to accidentally mess up your order of operations. Last problem. Now we're starting with grams. So again, I'm just setting up my cards. I'm doing the exact same thing that I've been doing. I'm going to use my map to tell me where to go. So if I'm starting with grams, right here, that means my next step is to get to moles. So if grams are on the top, grams are on the bottom, and then I put moles. If moles are on the top, moles are on the bottom. So now I'm here. My next step is to go to atoms, things, right? This question specifically wants molecules. I think your card is orange, so I will use orange so that it matches up with your cards. Molecules. So I've set up my units. What goes on the top has to go on the bottom. Now I can use my map again to tell me what numbers to put in place. So I know that anytime I'm talking about a mole, I'm going to use a number 1. And then when I'm talking about molecules, I'm going to use the 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. Anytime I'm talking about grams, I have to use molar mass. So right here, I need my molar mass. And we're talking about water, which is 2 H's and 1 O. So I have to add up 2 H's and 1 O. And I think that comes out to be about 18.02 or 18.01 grams. Okay, so whatever goes on top goes on the bottom. I've used my map to fill in my numbers. Now I'm ready to multiply the top and then divide by the bottom. You do not have to use parentheses here, but if you want to, just get in the habit. That's probably not a bad idea. So my final answer is 1.0, let's say 9 times 10 to the 24th molecules. And I know that it's molecules because molecules is the only thing that doesn't have a match. That's my leftover unit.